It wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal people in Australia were considered humans for the first time. In January 1967, there was a national referendum to decide if Aboriginal Australians should have Australian citizenship. Up to that point, they were officially, and you can document this, classified as flora and fauna and plants and animals.
In Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people.
Australia, a land of beauty, culture, and ancient wisdom. But beneath the surface lies a story of violence, theft, and silence. For over 65,000 years, Aboriginal people have lived on this land, and for the last 250 years, they have been fighting to survive on it. Watch and pay attention, and I will share my thought later.
Little girl, would you let her swim with Aboriginal children in a swimming pool?
My word, they'd be as good as what she is.
And you think that children should be allowed to swim together?
Of course. You should. They're all children, they're all the same.
Would you swim with them?
No, I don't. I wouldn't swim in the baths with them, although I like the old I've had quite a lot to do with him.
And you think they should be allowed to swim, especially the kids?
I certainly do think so.
What about
my heart?
You come to a person who knows quite a lot about the treatment of Aboriginals.
And you think that the children should be allowed to swim in the pools with the white children?
Indeed, yes. I think that the apathy would be worse here than in Africa if they don't do something constructive about the children.
What do you think about this segregation against Aborigines in western towns in New South Wales?
I reckon there should be none of it. There should be white, black, all together, live together.
I think that the Australian Aborigine is equal to one of us. As you know, they were the first in the land before us, and I reckon that segregation against them is silly and ridiculous. I think that they should have the equal rights such as any Australian should have today.
Well spoken. You sell newspapers, do you?
Yeah, I sell newspapers at Newtown Bridge, and I'm a good salesman at that.
Guys, you know, watching these clips, it just all of a sudden gives me a new perspective on things. Do you realize how much it can be easier for people to get along? Because I feel like for the most part of it, it's white men who created these harmful systems, right? Yeah. And if white women could stand with the other groups that are being harmed, and if they all could stand and work together, then I feel like the world would be a better place, you know. I really do like seeing melanated people and Aboriginal people from Australia speak up about their rights and what they need without necessarily having to rely on the white man to speak up for them on what they themselves need, you know. Right. It's like they say, the way she said, you cannot allow other people to speak on your behalf and talk about what you need or what you do not need. There's this one saying that says, if you do not wear a certain type of shoes, you cannot know where it hurts, right? And one thing I can say for clear is that even for white people, I can never understand how white people feel, especially when they walk in the sun. There are things that we cannot understand about white people. We cannot understand why they need to wash their hairs every day, and we only see the results if they don't, you know. And that is something you cannot know. Like, for example, us here in Africa, we cannot know that fact unless you hear it or see it from somebody, or you live close to these people, you know. And even at that, after we hear it, we can never truly understand what the white person is or the concept of the white person. And that is why I can never even myself support the idea of me as an African standing up to be an advocate of a white person or the community that is, you know. Exactly. So I really don't understand why, where there is a community where both white and black people or Aboriginals share the land, white people are representing even the Aboriginals in places like political seats in parliament, yet they don't know how these Aboriginal people live and where their shoe pinches, you know. Right.
Telling me to go back where I come from or to my own country or deport me or whatever. Sorry, but what do you think I am / from? What's happening? I'm like 100%. I can understand if an Aboriginal person was saying it, but my fellow Australians are saying it to me. Where am I from? I'm 100% white, West European.
Oh, we don't see color. Color doesn't mean anything. You see color. If someone speaks, sounds, or looks a certain way, they might be completely Australian, it doesn't matter. They're exhibiting more traits stereotypically of Islander does, or what a black person does, or an Asian, or really about who you are on the inside, or about how how you present. What is an Australian and what's it meant to look like? If Australians are looking at him going, go back to where you're from, they have the moral standing, the ethical, cultural nationalism to be like, you're not from here, get out. Everyone always goes, stop being a victim, it's not about race. To my understanding, the person who actually is white, who doesn't present as white, tell him to go back. So I'm going to tell him to go back. What do you think they're going to tell me?
The funny thing is that the people who always talk about you're not from here, go back to where you came from, it's not about race. The people who are normally loudest on this are the white people, right? Even in Europe, we've seen cases where apparently it started backfiring, and now not a lot of people say that, or those cases have gone quiet where...
Well, they've not gone quiet, they've just reduced.
They've reduced on the internet, but it got so bad to a point where black people used to be told every time, even in Europe, go back to where you're coming from. And let me just pass this point across. There are people who are born in Europe who happen to be black, right? Who necessarily don't have any relationship with Africa. They've been...
Except from their ancestry,
right? They've been living in Europe like generations and generations, yeah? And even those ones who are citizens are still being told, go back to where you're coming from. So why should you feel offended when you are looking like this, you're a palm-colored person, and somebody tells you to go back to where you're coming from? Because everybody has a history.
Right, and what's very interesting about the video that we've just watched is this was a white person being told by other white people to go back to where he's coming from. And this brother, I believe he's also Australian, he was asking, if a white person can be told, go back to where you're coming from, what about a person who looks like him, a melanated person?
Aura for aura, I feel like it would be fair if all, you know, people across the world were to be told, go back to where you're coming from. It's time, or even them, they start retracing their ancestry and they start retracing their true origin, you know, because nowhere they are settling originally belonged to them. Even in South Africa, we do hear that when white people immigrated to South Africa, okay, of course, they try and change history. It's so bad to a point where the generation today, there are those ones who genuinely believe South Africa
were the original settlers of
South Africa, and South Africa belongs to white people, you know, and that black people should be settled somewhere else.
A migratory community that found them in South Africa.
But let's continue watching, guys.
And to every single Australian who thinks they're more deserving of living in this country than a POC or than the real Australians, the Indigenous peoples, just listen, just hear me out. Let's say somebody comes into your house, your entire family except for you, and in front of you demolishes the whole house and builds a school. You would feel so violated, disrespected, and upset. Let's say the school's running and all the students are just looking at you and just acting like you don't deserve to be there, treating you like absolute crap, by the way, bullying you, singling you out, alienating you in your own home. But they're saying that it's not your home, it's their home. They're saying all they've known is this school and they don't know who you are and why you think that you're deserving of being here. And you're saying, no, well, this is my home, I was here before, I swear. But they're still looking at you sideways and they're still judging you. How would you feel? Wouldn't you feel outraged? Wouldn't you ask for a say in the rules or being represented, or wouldn't you just ask to be acknowledged as single, just acknowledgement for respect? That's what they're asking for. And then people in my comments are saying, oh, well, we've apologized so many times. What's apology without change? Sorry, what is apology? It's literally manipulation. That's what you guys are doing. It's the same in a toxic relationship when the guy says, sorry, I'll change, I'll be better, and he turns around tomorrow and cheats on you 7 times in front of you.
The people of Australia, originally Australia was an African land. In fact, in European documentation, they considered it an African satellite. When the British came into Australia and began the mass extermination of African people, they were crystal clear who they were exterminating because they said it. And also we know that right off the coast of Australia was an island called Tasmania, a little island off the coast of Tasmania. There are no living Tasmanians in existence right now. You can't find a Tasmanian man, woman, or child because the British systematically exterminated the entire population.
It wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal people in Australia were considered humans for the first time. In January 1967, there was a national referendum to decide if Aboriginal Australians should have Australian citizenship. Up to that point, they were officially, and you can document this, classified as flora and fauna and plants and animals.
Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people They would have they would take the children and take them to breeding camps and breeding farms and breed the darker ones and the mulatto ones with white. And they would literally breed the melanin out of these people. The movie Rabbit Proof Fence is about that breeding process, them breeding out the melanin of the Aboriginal people. So it was very deep what was going on over there.
When people talk about Australia, they love to highlight the beaches, the accents, the kangaroos. But you rarely hear them talk about the blood beneath the soil. Because Australia is just like the US. It wasn't discovered. It was invaded. And the first thing they tried to do was wipe the oldest living culture off the face of the earth. So let's back up for a second. The Aboriginal people of Australia have been on that continent for 65,000 years. Let that sit. They are the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Not only did they live in harmony with the land, they had complex languages, spiritual systems, astronomy, trade, and none of it was savage or primitive. But when the British showed up in 1788, they saw none of that. They saw a land they wanted and people they thought didn't count. So they claimed the land as nobody's land, like people weren't already living there. And what followed was centuries of massacre, displacement, slavery, and dehumanization. Aboriginal people were hunted like animals. Entire tribes were wiped out. Their water sources were poisoned. Children were taken. Women were assaulted. Men were imprisoned. Sometimes for just being Aboriginal. Their language banned. Their cultural practices outlawed. Their sacred land stolen. They weren't even considered full citizens on their land until 1967. Let me repeat that. The original custodians of that land weren't counted as people until less than 60 years ago. And from the late 1800s to the 1970s, the government had a plan to breed out the Black. That's not an exaggeration. That's what they actually called it. They took thousands of Aboriginal children from their families, the stolen generation, and placed them in white homes or church institutions. Sound familiar? They erased their names, told them their families didn't want them. And when those children cried for their mothers, nobody came. Because colonialism isn't just about land. It's about memory. And they were trying to erase it all. So when you hear people talk about Australia like it's just another Western paradise, know this. There's blood in the soil and trauma in the air. And the world is still catching up to the truth. Because Aboriginal people didn't just survive genocide. They preserved the oldest culture on the planet through it. And that's resistance. That's legacy. That's a miracle that colonizers couldn't kill, no matter how hard they tried.
When the descendants of defective sibling DNA start calling indigenous people uncivilized, it's projection. Because in the 1500s, their lice-infested, disease-ridden ancestors dragged over 30 deadly diseases to this continent, which killed off more than 80% of the indigenous population because they were walking biohazards who did not bathe. These are people who literally threw their feces and urine outside of their windows and watched it fester in the streets until it rained and turned their towns into diarrhea soup. Meanwhile, indigenous people in the 1500s had public sanitation, organized waste removal, clean streets they swept and washed daily, and people who bathed daily, sometimes twice. We literally had to teach these plate-carrying invaders how to wash their asses. And then Mr. Trump University says we lived in tents. Tents? Our cities had towering architecture and stone temples that dwarfed anything in Europe during that time, in the Americas and in Africa. And since you mentioned Africa, Africans were master architects who gave the world mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Europe produced the colonizers who stole it all. Europe gave the world genocide, colonization, and syphilis. And some of y'all today still don't bathe.
British invaded Australia in 1788. They declared the land terra nullius, nobody's land. This legal fiction allowed them to steal the land without treaties, without compensation, and without acknowledgement of the people who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. The result was genocide, massacres, stolen children, cultural erasure, and forced removal from sacred lands. And the worst part, It did not end in the 1800s. The pain continues today in government policy, prison, health systems, and education. Aboriginal Australians make up just 3% of the population, but in some states, they make up to over 30% of the prison population. In juvenile detention, it is even worse. Children as young as 10 are still being arrested and locked up. Many are detained for minor offenses that white children would never be jailed for, like unpaid fines or fair invasion. Aboriginal kids are not just being protected, they are being criminalized by a system designed to control, not to heal. Since the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, over 500 Indigenous people have died in police or prison custody. Most of these cases result in no charges, no accountability, no justice. David Dungay Jr. was a 26-year-old Aboriginal man who died in prison after being restrained by guards while saying, "I cannot breathe." Sound familiar? This is not just about individual bad cops. It is about a system that sees Black and Indigenous lives as disposable. Despite some progress, like native title, most Aboriginal land remains under white control. Mining companies are still allowed to destroy sacred sites. In 2020, Rio Tinto blew up Juukan Gorge, a 46,000-year-old sacred site, legally. And while Australia profits from Aboriginal land, many Aboriginal communities lived without clean water, proper housing, or a basic health services. Aboriginal Australians die, on average, 8 to 10 years earlier than non-Indigenous Australians. They experience higher rates of preventable diseases, suicide, and infant mortality. This is not a gap, it is a wound caused by systemic neglect, underfunding, and institutional racism. In 2023, Australians vote on a referendum to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait. Australians voted on a referendum to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the constitutions known as the Voice to Parliament. It was voted down, a moment that could have brought healing, instead reopened centuries-old scars. But Indigenous people are not giving up. They are organizing, resisting, reclaiming languages, reviving culture, and fighting for truth-telling and treaty. They are not asking for clarity. They are not asking for charity. They are demanding justice. They are demanding a country that tells the truth. To ignore this story is to be complicit. To remain neutral is to side with oppression. The fight for Aboriginal justice is not just an Aboriginal issue. It is an Australian issue, a human issue. Thank you for watching, guys. Do not forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comment box below. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.